People don't want to talk about politics because they invest too much of their identity and worth in politics. And people don't want to talk about religion because they know they're not investing enough of their value and worth in religion.
Welcome to the ATSI podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This podcast puts you in touch with great artists and culture makers because I believe what they do deepens and enriches our lives. My guest on episode 3 is author and White House strategist Michael Weir. Buzzfeed describes Michael as one of President Obama's ambassadors to America's believers. Having served in the White House Faith-Based Initiatives Office, he is recently the author of a wonderful book entitled Reclaiming Hope, Lessons Learned in the Obama White House about the future of faith in America. The book is available for pre-order at Amazon.com. Michael is also, as it turns out, a Buffalo Bills fan, which means he and I share a bit of the sadness that comes from backing historically underachieving teams. Go Raiders. Check it out.
Great,
how are you?
Great to be connected.
Yeah, man. Where are you? Are you home now? What are you doing?
Yeah. So I'm in DC.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Okay. Are you okay now?
Yeah. I'm a proud Buffalonian.
Does it make you a Bills fan? You're a Buffalo Bills fan.
I am a huge Buffalo Bills fan. Yeah.
That's
so
just hard.
I don't know if you saw the ESPN 30 for 30 special on the Buffalo Bills.
No, not yet. I love that show, though.
So it was just nominated for an Emmy, and it covers the Buffalo Bills 4 Super Bowls. And, of course, by 4 Super Bowls, I mean 4 straight Super Bowl losses.
Yes. I remember.
But just to be clear, that's 4 straight AFC championships.
Yeah,
so,
there's always a different way to look at that. It's called the sunny side.
Yeah. Which also, the sunny side of things is not something we have a lot of in Buffalo either. So.
Yeah, you got to get that when you can get it.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yes, I'm a big Bills fan.
So I'll let you describe a little more comprehensively what it is you do, but I'll come in through this door. I mean, like at a dinner party, topics like religion and politics are generally like that's bad news. Like in good company, you don't want to have conversations about religion and politics. Those are the things people are trying to avoid, and yet you work and live at the intersection of religion and politics. Yeah. So you've just got to be a kick to have at like the Christmas party.
I am a blast. I'm an absolute blast. People invite me over to their Thanksgivings and Christmases as entertainment.
Yeah, people who aren't your family.
That's right. Yeah.
I talk about these things in terms of like these third rail issues. Sexuality is to some degree one of them, but religion, politics. It's like you don't touch the third rail because you'll blow the whole thing up. Does living and working at this intersection make you nervous? Do you feel that tension? Do you or is it just you're sort of in the soup and it just doesn't bother you anymore?
Well, look, I think religion and politics are touchy, but almost for opposite reasons. People don't want to talk about politics because they invest too much of their identity and worth in politics. And people don't want to talk about religion because they know they're not investing enough of their value and worth in religion. And so they do sort of drive down to sort of core conceptions of who we are and what the world should be. But that also means they're like terribly important. And we can't afford to ignore them. And because they're so important, they have to intersect. Things that are that important are going to influence one another, whether we like it or not, whether we try and sort of pretend that they're not related or not.
So what does it mean to invest too much in politics? Is that just an emotional thing? Because we're talking, it's like whatever the number of people, it's like less than half people who can vote do. So what, like, when you talk about people investing too much in politics, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, we have a rising problem of polarization. And a Stanford study came out in 2014 that showed that this isn't just like politicians, that actually polarization has seeped into our communities. And so they actually did a controlled study. I don't know if you've heard about sort of implicit bias tests where they become more familiar to folks through race, and how one of the types of tests works is images will flash on like a computer screen, and then adjectives that are either positive or negative, and the way that people respond or relate positive adjectives to different races or negative adjectives to different races actually exposes a lot of implicit bias. Well, these political scientists, I believe they were sociologists, did the test with political affiliation and found that the bias was actually more profound in terms of the influence on the individual. Obviously, there are many more opportunities for discrimination or prejudice to take place when we're talking about race, but because you can't tell whether a person's a Republican or Democrat if they come into your store or that kind of thing. But the impact of polarization was extremely profound. And so in the 1960s, if you asked a parent what they would not want their child to marry, the top two answers would be, I wouldn't want my child to marry someone who's a different religion, and I wouldn't want my child to marry someone who's a different race. Now, the top thing that parents don't want their children to marry is a Republican if they're a Democrat, or a Democrat if they're a Republican. And you just have to...
real? That's an actual test?
That's real. That's an actual test. And you just have to...
Is cowboy still on the list? Because I remember there was a time when, like, mamas don't let your babies to be cowboys. Because there was like a thing. Not on the list.
Well, and you got to think about how hard society must have been for cowboys.
It really says something that we've moved that far past cowboy.
That's right. But the way that affects us in our daily lives is something that's pretty new. It's pretty new for us to associate with people on the basis of their political views. That isn't something that used to take place to the extent it does today.
I guess like maybe it feels like it's been that way, but you're saying this a little bit more, or at least studies-wise, that's more recent that it's been this polarized.
The president gave a speech on civility in 2010, and he said, let's not get overly nostalgic and romanticize the past. He says we haven't had a caning on the floor of the Senate in 200 years, which we
that's
did.
Progress.
Which we did have. That's progress. And so DC's never been like a place of rainbows and gumdrops, but it's the penetration into communities, into people's daily lives outside of DC, people who don't do politics for a living. That's where there's a pretty new problem.
So who fixes that? So who goes after that? Like who deals with that divisiveness, that division, the gap? How does that get fixed?
It's a huge problem. And there's no sort of silver bullet, but just a couple sort of ideas. There's a sort of growth of the creation of products and websites and services that serve increasingly narrow niches. Part of the way that we solve this is to move from a sort of micro-targeting mentality to think entrepreneurially and civically about how we create spaces where people of not just different races and genders, but we really need to start thinking about how to get people who think differently together. Bill Clinton, and I think he was trying to be provocative, and I don't think he meant it literally, but he said the last remaining form of bigotry is against those who disagree with you. The last remaining acceptable form of bigotry is against those who disagree with you.
That doesn't sound entirely wrong to me.
I think he's speaking to sort of elites and to people who. To the people who would say that they have no prejudice,
right.
he's pointing. Well, let's hold on there. So I think creating spaces where, because institutions have been wiped out or are being wiped out in our society. Really, the church is one of the last places where people of different viewpoints get together, and in some corners of the church, there's not too much ideological diversity even there. But, we don't have the Lions Club, Rotary Club sort of engagement that we used to.
Right.
The veterans halls, the VFW halls aren't as trafficked as they used to be. And so we've forgotten how to negotiate and deal with people who think differently than we do.
And insofar as, part of the difference between being in the Vets Hall or at Rotary is if you have a disagreement, you're sitting across the table or next to someone in a chair, and you have to actually say that to their face.
Exactly.
As opposed to, Facebook or whatever, and you can type it and not even care what someone says on the other side. It's no longer this isn't really a human disagreement. It becomes this totally disembodied idea. My politics aren't human. It's just, it's ideology. And that's all it is ideology.
Yes.
And because it's just ideas versus ideas, I'm allowed to hate you as an embodiment of ideas. And I don't feel like I'm hating you as a person. I wouldn't say I hate you as a person. I just hate everything I know about you, which is who you are as an embodiment of your ideas.
Yep.
That's super sad.
Yeah.
Working in the White House, then you what's your relationship to the White House?
So I served. So I worked on the 2008 campaign, and then I did worked on the inaugural, and then for the first 3.5 years of the president's term, I was in the faith-based office. And so I worked in the White House.
What is the faith-based office?
So it was started by President Bush in 2001. So it's a relatively new office.
Was it David? Is it David Quo? Is that right?
Yeah. David was a good friend. David was a much smarter, had a much more nimble mind than I did, but we had sort of an analogous roles there. So David was the number 2 in the faith-based office under its first director, a great guy, John DiIulio, and so the office does a couple of things, and I'll talk about the office under President Obama. First, the White House office co-manages. And I'll try not to be too wonky here, but the office co-manages centers for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships across the federal government. So, for instance, there's a faith-based center at Department of Health and Human Services that works with faith-based organizations and nonprofits around issues like adoption and fatherhood. There's a center at Department of Justice that works on prisoner reentry issues. At FEMA, they do disaster relief. At the EPA, they work with congregations and nonprofits around retrofitting buildings. And at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they work on homelessness. So just sort of down the line, I believe there are now, I want to say 14 centers. There were, I believe 12 when we came in, and since then the center was added at the State Department, and a center was added at the Environmental Protection Agency under this president. And so the White House office co-manages those centers across the federal government to make sure that faith-based and nonprofit organizations have a voice in the operations of government, and that they have sort of an access point. And then sort of the second sort of piece of it, which is what I spent a lot of my time on, which was the office helps the president build religious relationships and speak to and communicate his policies to the faith community, and to hear from the faith community about what they think, what they need, what they're asking for. And so it's really the front door to the White House for the 70% of Americans who are religious. And so I spent most of my time working with pastors and heads of organizations like World Vision, and I mean, we both know the folks at the Justice Conference really well, and so I get to know them, and worked with a pretty wide array of religious leaders across kind of faith groups. And then I get the third piece is that the faith-based office sits under the White House Domestic Policy Council. And so the Domestic Policy Council covers basically all domestic policy issues outside of like taxes and like hard economic issues. And so everything from immigration to education, the domestic, we had a seat at the table on those policies. And as part of that work, I focused on adoption and foster care and our human trafficking efforts. And it was a great honor to work with the adoption and anti-human trafficking communities while I was there at the White House.
So while you're bridging relationships then between the White House and individual leaders in the faith community and individual congregations and faith communities in America, that was part of your job.
Yeah, and it was the best. It was the best part about it. I mean, I could have been at the White House doing just straight communications work. I could have been, in a number of different departments and had a number of different functions. But the fact that I got to go to work every day and really see the best of the faith community and work with them, it was just. I mean, I know this is. It was an immense. It's hard to describe what it's like to walk into work, walk into the White House, or to our townhouse on Jackson Place, which is this sort of Sesame Street-like road right in front of the White House, and be in that place, and then to be able to help and resource the faith community to serve those most in need. I mean, it was in many ways a surreal experience, and it honestly didn't get less surreal as the time went on.
What's like? I mean, one of my favorite shows, and as you talk about being in communications in the White House, my mind goes to Toby Ziegler and Sam Seaborn, and there's that really wonderful moment. I think it's end of season 1, beginning season 2, when they're introduced to Charlie, and who eventually becomes part of the show. And there's Leo McGarry, and the president's about to give a speech from the Oval Office. Cameras go on, and Charlie's standing there. Yeah. And he says, "Does it always feel like this?" And Leo McGarry says, "Like, it never goes away. Like, that feeling, like you're working in the White House, and that magic, it never goes away." You're saying, like, that's real. Like, it never goes away.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. Now, it's really... it's really important. A lot of folks get there, and it's just so busy. You're working such long hours. It's really difficult to stop and appreciate what's going on. And so you really have to be intentional, and sometimes that's just not possible. I mean, sometimes, something heavy is going on. It's really hard to admire the scenery, but definitely there are moments that you put away that couldn't happen anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I bet. As a communications person in the White House, fostering relationships with the faith community, we've had, we've all had the conversation in one way, shape, or form about the president, who has said over and over that he's a Christian.
Yeah.
At some point, it was a poll, whatever. I think you wrote about this. There's a poll at some point, somewhere within like the 2 or 3 year range. It was like 1 out of 5 people polled. Something close to 30% of Americans polled they didn't just doubt that he was a Christian, they believed he was a Muslim.
Yeah.
And now we've had that conversation. Lots of people, we've talked about it, how silly, how crazy that is, and it's still crazy. It just blows my mind that that's still a conversation in any way, shape, or form. But you didn't just have the conversation. You were taking phone calls, and you were engaged in like email exchanges with people. Yeah. I mean. I didn't even have ask the question, but like, what on earth? Like, how do you do that? Are people emailing you? Like, are you reaching out to folks and saying, "Hey, we've got this program, I'd love to talk to you about it," and folks are writing back and saying, "Yeah, but he's a Muslim"? Is that what's happening?
Well, let me put it this way: it is unbelievable to work an entire day on. Let's just say, for instance, on finding how the faith community can work to find children who need homes, how to find them homes, how to find them families, and you're about to leave at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night and get home, and someone forwards you a shoddy flyer. That goes on an email that pretends to show the president hosting folks with prayer rugs on the south lawn of the White House for a jihad. and I wish I could tell you that this was a hypothetical. You're getting spammed.
You're like you're getting the same crap in your inbox as I'm getting.
Well, exactly. Only I'm partly responsible for dealing with it.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it ended up on your plate because I never knew what to do. It's like I have no power here.
It ends up on someone's plate.
Goodness.
So we talk more about what was behind that, what that is. I think the broadest point I would make is we have a politics right now on both sides that is driven not by policy, but by identity. And I don't mean that in like a 90s, I don't mean that solely in like a 90s identity politics kind of way. What I mean by that is people are voting for people they identify with, and against people that they don't just think their ideas are wrong, but that they can't relate to them. They identify them as a moral bad, as a moral
they're personally
evil,
as a person an enemy.
That's right. And so we have a sort of a politics that is feeding off of this now, and people are concerned that if they take their foot off the pedal on their end, that's only opening up an opportunity for the other side. And so it's not sufficient to make a substantive critique of the president's policy on Israel or in the Middle East, or the president's decisions around religious liberty. No, he has to be a Muslim, because this, at the end, it can't be just about policy. It has to be about who he is as a man. And the same thing goes on the other side. This is how strategists are thinking, which doesn't mean that we say, oh man, like that's awful, I don't want any part of it. It just means be careful about how your emotions and how your sense of belonging is being used to maybe lead you to more drastic positions or sort of ideas about the quote unquote opposition than you would have otherwise.
There's this really interesting angle that you brought up in a piece you wrote about the Charleston shootings, about the way people receive faith statements or faith practice from African Americans. That African American Christianity, I think your line was African American Christianity is treated as a cultural rather than a theological phenomenon. That it's received as it's some form of baggage rather than like a conscious decision made on behalf of the African Americans who's practicing religion. The way I'm looking at the piece right now says, media racists and liberal elites alike tend to treat African American Christianity as a cultural, not theological phenomenon, and that it's one of the reasons I believe, this is you writing, President Obama has quote unquote gotten away with explicitly religious language that, coming from a white president, would earn him screeds on liberal websites accusing him of violating the separation of church and state. But with a black president, you write, and this line is just fascinating for me, but with the black president, many media pundits, racists, and white secular elites, you like taking the hammer to these guys, seem to shrug off his faith as statements as arising from cultural baggage and not sincerely held beliefs. The piece wasn't specifically about the president and his faith, but it was about black churches, black faith, and the way the majority populace, or most of the folks in seats of power, view the black expression of faith, and that really is a political question and a conundrum that you go after. Can you talk about, when you talk about the trivialization of the Christianity expressed by black churches and Christians?
I bet. If you watch late night comedy, I guarantee you have seen the appropriation of a black gospel choir for used in a joke in the last 3 months. I mean, in my head right now, I can picture a gospel choir being used to make usually an unsavory joke on a number of late night shows. I can think of the stereotypical black preacher being used in media and culture to sort of give the feeling or the sort of emotional experience of really a cultural experience of being in church with absolutely no regard given to the fact that people believe what the preacher is saying. Like it's almost what the preacher is saying is irrelevant. I just, I love the way a black gospel choir sounds. It really makes me feel like I'm in a movie. And that kind of, and so when Charleston happened and forgiveness was expressed by some of the families, you heard a number of voices either discrediting the religious motivation, saying that the forgiveness was really just a result of historical baggage, like black people just haven't evolved yet because of white oppression, and once they do, they won't be Christian anymore, and that is an insidious racist idea. Now, I wrote about that in Christianity Today and was able to go more in depth than I'll be able to now. But to relate it back to the president, the Democratic Party right now is split into even thirds between people of black and Hispanic Christians, white people of faith, primarily mainline Protestants, and Catholics and religiously unaffiliated and secular folks. So a third of the Democratic Party, which is much, again, like our country is like 75% religious. And so to have a third of the Democratic Party be secular, it's going to have a political impact. And that slice has grown over the last 8 years. And Barack Obama has kind of been the perfect transition, the perfect bridge from the Democratic Party of old that had a different coalition to the Democratic Party of today, where you could have, Bill Maher give $1 million to the Barack Obama's super PAC in 2012, and yet say on his show multiple times that he believes the president is not a Christian and that the president is lying when he says he's a Christian. I mean, that is so that's why I kept on. That's why I was so forceful in putting together racists with media elites and liberals, because I want them to see the company they're in when they act as if a group of people is not do not believe what they're saying they believe. The forgiveness in Charleston, the people who forgave said they did it because of Jesus. So don't tell them, you just don't understand your history. And these are mostly white people telling them this. I mean,
right.
It was an amazing. It was a striking sort of cultural moment to see that.
Yeah, more like confounding, just sort of dumbstruck watching that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And it felt very much like it feels very much like the when the president says, it's not he's not like put out some sort of statement, hey guys, I'm a Christian, but when he talks about his faith as a Christian, to hear folks say no, like we get to decide whether you're serious about that or not. Like it blows my mind, and it seems to really come from that same place, that as a white Christian and a person in a place of power, I get to decide whether or not you as a black male, as a black person, are sincere about your faith. I get to decide whether that's real or not.
Yeah. And listen, so there's also the perspective, right, that, and I'm going to try and step back from the fact that, I prayed with the president, and I worked.
You were there.
But just stepping back, there's also the perspective. Well, there's a political advantage. Politicians have to say these things. I always sort of, frankly, like roll my eyes a little bit when people think they're making like a really insightful observation that politicians are doing politics. It's in their name, like that's they're politicians because they're in politics. Our duty, particularly journalists and those with a platform, but really as citizens, is to hold people accountable for the things that they say. And so I have no problem with if a candidate puts out there that they're a Christian, with people pushing in on that and wanting to sort of tease that out a little bit. What is very destructive to our political dialogue is when we start putting the burden on citizens for telling whether politicians are telling the truth or not, because that gives politicians a green light to mislead the American people, and then it's on the American people for not having the right intuition. That's not how a functioning democracy acts.
When I ran into you last in Pittsburgh. I wanted to say, we want to talk about when we talked about having this conversation. We had the meeting about the meeting, and I said, I would love to talk a little bit about why should people care about politics, but the question that started to really bug me is how do people care about politics? And part of the hang up or the sort of the mess around this is not necessarily that people watch House of Cards and think that's exactly how it goes, but more to the point that people will watch House of Cards and say, it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
And don't want to get involved, don't believe that it matters. So the don't believe that it matters, A, because it's corrupt, B, because it's someone else's job, C, because it's one vote and the system is rigged, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
All of that, I get those as questions, but I'm trying to move past why should I care?
Yeah.
To how do people go ahead and care about politics?
Yeah. So G.K. Chesterton has this amazing line. He says that men did not love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because men loved her. And part of what I take him to mean there is that we have a duty, but not just a duty. We have a stake in the governing and in the condition of the society in which we live. And so, people who say, a pox on both their houses, or, it's politics is just too corrupt. The hard truth about our politics is it's a reflection of us. And that our politics is, and this is going to sound but, again, I was there. Our politics is only as good as we make it. I mean, so let me give you one example. And this is something that gets some pushback, especially among younger people. But I've been saying it on the road for 2 years, and unlike a lot of my other ideas, that I'll receive good pushback and sort of modulate and learn new things. I learn new things when I bring this up, but I've become more convinced that this is a problem rather than less, and that is, we have the highest number of political independence in this country that we have ever had. 41% of Americans are political independents. And so there's a whole narrative about that says, well, those are people who, just don't find themselves in either of our political parties, that their conscience just won't allow them to be a Democrat or Republican because they believe things that are, bigger than any one party. And I got to say, that's just complete hogwash. The purpose of political parties is not to define each member's all of their political views. And what happens when we make that decision that, well, Democrats aren't perfect, Republicans aren't perfect, I'm going to be an independent so I could be perfect. What we do is we withdraw one of the primary levers we have to influence those political parties and therefore our politics for the better. And so people wonder why our political parties have become more ideologically consolidated, less willing to compromise, more extreme. And the reason is that all of the people who would offer some moderation, some caution to these parties that maybe their platforms aren't right on the money, they've left. They're not even in the room.
They've abandoned the system.
They're not even in the room.
The overwhelming sentiment among folks my age and slightly younger is I'm not even going to get involved because it's all broken. And the thought in my mind is it's most broken because you're not there. It's most broken because you're not participating. It's like you have the means, you have all this power accessible to you, and you don't want to pick up and wield it because you don't think it matters. Yeah. Which is it's this totally self-defeating cycle of thought. Like actually just going and showing up and voting, and even if you don't know every ballot measure and everything,
that's right.
To make what effort you can to vote on the things you actually care about, So by how do I care about it? I mean, don't I just go and hear the things that I know enough about to actually make a conscious decision, and I'm going to apply myself and show up and vote?
Yes. So let me give a few concrete sort of. So yes, voting is fundamental. Associational commitments are essential. We are kind of we're an entrepreneurial, individualistic generation that everyone has a nonprofit. Everyone sort of is has their own Kickstarter. Politics doesn't work that way.
Like you've got to choose a party, in other words.
Well, you not only do you have to choose a party, but you're best advancing your interests when you do it in partnership with others. And so I don't. Well, I do care about you and the listeners about what you believe on specific policies, but I care less about that than that citizens are involved in whatever way, in whatever sort of political stream they're in. But one of the ways that you sort of increases, not just by tweeting and Facebooking like what you think, but actually find organizations that generally agree with you, or issue organizations. So, for instance, if you care about international development, you could hashtag or you could raise money for charity water on your birthday, which I think you should do too. But how about throwing your weight behind an organization like World Relief or World Vision that actually has professional advocates who advance a robust international development policy on the ground? What about supporting organizations like Sojourners or the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission?
You're talking about ultimately not drawing some sort of hard line as if it existed between ethically and responsibly caring for the issues, there's an imaginary line between politics over there, and which is all. It's about the management of culture and the care, in a sense, of culture in one way, and then over here in some purer way is I can do my kind of charitable work and give a little bit of money here and just, but there really isn't a line between that's all sort of like it's a little bit more of a mess. So instead of just pretending like I can dip my toes in the pool and have done justice, if you care about it, align yourself with an organization and know that comes with a little bit of compromise, because there's just no way anyone, whether it's World Vision or International Justice Mission or the DNC, no one's going to come to purely and fully embody all of your ideals. You're going to find some sort of rub with anyone you align yourself with. So you kind of have to do it anyways.
That's right. And so, like, Bono is a great example, right? Like this individual powerhouse. Yet even Bono, like, I think just like 2 weeks ago was, writing a letter to members of Congress on aid for Syria. He helped start the One campaign, which is, putting this into practice, which is, I'm Bono, I'm great. But if we don't offer a way, and I'll just be careful, right? Like Bono was in a position where he could provide unique value by starting something new. I'm not calling on everyone to be Bono in terms of starting a new organization. I'm saying if you agree with what the One campaign is doing, throw your weight behind the One campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's key. And then just just one more, if I could, one more practical advice, and then I have what I hope is like an encouraging anecdote.
Yeah.
So just the one last quick piece of advice is people would be stunned by how little or how rarely members of Congress, members of your state legislature hear from their constituents. And I was talking with Michael Gerson, who was worked on the Hill, was Bush's chief speechwriter, President George W. Bush's chief speechwriter. And we were just commenting on the fact, when you're on the Hill and they have staff whose basically their sole job is receiving, compiling the data, and responding to mail they receive from constituents. And if you're that staffer and you receive 10 letters from constituents on an issue, you're taking that to your boss, because your boss, the member of Congress, wants to know what's happening in his district. And so,
when those phone calls, those emails, those letters, they don't go to they don't filter into the trash. It's not like the big black hole on the other end of that interaction. You write a letter to your state representative, and someone who matters is going to read that on the other end.
Yes, and I'll give you. So I received, and I don't remember receiving one of these before, but just recently moved to Virginia. I was in Maryland before. For those who haven't been in D.C., basically you're in D.C. if you're in D.C., Virginia, or Maryland. But so I just moved to Virginia and received my first letter from my state representative, and on it, the whole letter was basically all of the votes he took that session, and then he listed what constituent mail he got on each of those votes, what they urged him to do, and how he actually voted. And something like, I think there were only 2 examples where he voted against what a majority of his constituents asked for. And so it's just a profound thing. And then the example I want to give, I mentioned I worked on trafficking issues. In January 2012, the Passion Conference packed out the Georgia Dome with 60,000 college students that gave $3 million to fight human trafficking. Like a great, incredible accomplishment that doesn't have any apparent direct ties to government, although I'd say the places where some of the places where they donated that money depend on government coordination for their work. But let's put that aside from now. But like this great church-based effort, right? And you would think it ends there, right? The Passion, there wasn't like a real appeal to politicians. It wasn't a political event. It was, we are the body of Christ. We believe Jesus opposes the oppressor and frees the slave, and that's what we're here for. Well, I saw that, and it made national, really international news. I saw that. There was a CNN.com story on it that showed the Georgia Dome, and I had a meeting just a few days later with one of the president's top advisors in the West Wing. And we were meeting on a whole range of issues. At the end of the meeting, he just sort of kind of asked me if anything interesting was going on. And I took the opportunity to tell him about 60,000 college students so fired up about this justice issue that they gave college students donating $3 million is a pretty incredible thing.
Right.
Well, within 2 weeks of that meeting, the president was at the National Prayer Breakfast mentioning Passion and what they did in the Georgia Dome. Within a few months of that meeting, the president for the first time hosted his interagency cabinet meeting on human trafficking at the White House, as opposed to it being in some backroom corridor on the 8th floor of the State Department. And then in September of 2012, the president of the United States gave the longest speech on modern slavery, or the longest speech on slavery of any president since Abraham Lincoln. And out of that speech flowed actual policy changes that amounted to over $100 million in extra spending going to fight human trafficking, adjustments in how Homeland Security and other departments analyzed whether there was human trafficking going on in the countries or in the cities. I mean, so you could draw a direct line from Christians who just stepped out on an issue they cared about And it wasn't an individual thing. They came together as a community and made their voices heard. You could draw a straight line from that to the president of the United States and the leader of the free world acting. Not solely because of that, but it helped provoke a conversation that spurred action. And so I want that to be sort of an encouragement to folks listening who, look at politics and think it's such a mess. And, we live in such a huge country and there's so much money sort of involved in lobbying and how could I ever be heard? And I could give you example after example of committed citizens actually making a difference in the policy process. And that's just one.
That's really good. Well, Michael, thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed this. It's a good. I'm glad we recorded our first conversation because I feel like now we have a bar to clear. Go back and be like, well, we did accomplish these things last time.
That's right. It was great talking to you.
Good. We'll talk again soon.
Hey, thanks so much, Justin.
You got it. And thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the At Sea podcast. You can find Michael Weir at his website. It's Michael R. Weir. Weir is WEAR.com. MichaelRweir.com. Again, his book, Reclaiming Hope, Lessons Learned in the Obama White House About the Future of Faith in America, is available right now, hardcover and Kindle, at Amazon.com. You can find us, our past episodes, and even some future plans at SeaEvents.com, and I'm always available at JustinMcRoberts.com. Hope you're really enjoying what we're doing with the podcast, and if you are, share it with a friend or two, and leave us a positive review at iTunes. Until next time.